this one guy said, "I'm out of grenades. Does anybody have one?" And I said, "Yeah, take mine." And so I gave it to him, and I just happened to turn and watch it. And when he threw it, he didn't get out past the overhang enough, and he threw it and it hit inside the lip of the breezeway and started rolling back. It's rolling behind people, and they're all facing out. No one sees it. There's a fine line between valor and stupidity and just plain luck. And just then I did a rough guess. And so I ran over and grabbed the back of two of my guys who were facing out. The grenade rolled on one side of the pillar, and I was able to get them off that side and pull them around to the other side. So it detonated very close to us, but behind, a 3-foot big chunk cement barrier.
Stay tuned following this episode for a combat story from one of our listeners. Welcome to Combat Story. I'm Ryan Puget, and I served Warzone tours as an Army attack helicopter pilot and CIA officer over a 15-year career. I'm fascinated by the experiences of the elite in combat. On this show, I interview some of the best to understand what combat felt like on their front lines. This is Combat Story. Today we hear the combat story of Jeff Morris, a former Army Infantry Officer who commanded soldiers in Iraq over 2 brutal deployments, one in 2004 and another during the surge in 2006. Fighting on some of the most well-known and infamous streets of Baghdad. As platoon leader with 1st Cav, Jeff's platoon of 34 men were awarded 27 Purple Hearts. In one intense battle that we dive into from this time, 2 soldiers were awarded Silver Stars, and Jeff was awarded a Bronze Star with V device. Jeff went on to be a highly respected Infantry Company Commander, again with 1st Cav, where he lost 8 men during fighting that saw almost every Bradley and M1 tank assigned to his unit destroyed by EFPs. Jeff documented these experiences in his book, Legion Rising, Surviving Combat and the Scars It Left Behind, and established the Legion 8 Foundation to honor the lives of the 8 men lost under his command. I hope you enjoy this very real and humble combat story as much as I did. All right. Hey, Jeff, thanks for taking the time to share your story today.
No, Ryan, thank you, man. I appreciate the opportunity and appreciate the great work that you're doing with the show. So thank you. Honored to be here.
Well, I really appreciate it. And I think we got to start out on a light note that you and I had talked about beforehand. But for all the guys listening out there, Jeff can help explain a little bit how we help push off a life-altering decision of his today. Jeff, if you could share more, might start us off on the right foot here.
Yeah, I guess if the original plan would have stayed, either we would have had to reschedule or I would be doing this interview with an ice pack on my nuts after getting my vasectomy this morning. So I had some other things going on and we were talking about rescheduling it. And then you threw this date out there and I'm like, oh, sorry, honey. So she's not real happy with me right now because we initially thought we could do it next week, but then that got pushed off. And then my doctor's going out of town for a month. So now it's pushed off till July, but 4 kids is enough, man. Yeah. So yeah, thanks for saving me a little bit of discomfort this weekend.
Oh, it's all good. All right. So we do have a lot of similarities, but that in fact is not one of them because I've already had that. So I wanted to start out though with a few of the similarities that I saw for us. And then I want to dive into your childhood. And a lot of this I am drawing from Legion Rising, your book. Great read, by the way. It really takes you through the feelings of a combat leader in those experiences in combat. So we'll dive into it. But some of the things that really jumped out at me, Jeff, that I wanted to touch on, the importance of high school sports for you, Black Hawk Down as a key book that you read. Like for me, I absolutely remember that. And I want to come back to if another book tops that for you these days. The desire to be a SEAL, I shared that. Like I desperately wanted to be one. Neither of us, spoiler alert, became one.
Nope.
We both played college football at the time. For us, it was 1AA. I played at Georgetown. Yeah. I know you played for 4 years at Stanford, right?
Stanford,
and then
yeah.
Stanford, sorry. Stanford.
Yeah, that's all right.
Commissioning into the conventional Army. And then I'll pause here, but the irrevocable shift that you felt going into combat. So a lot of that, I just saw strong similarities. I want to dive into 2 of those before we go back to you as a younger kid. I'd like to start with Black Hawk Down. Just you really talk about it in the book as having this great meaning to you. What was that like? When did you read it, and what did it kind of change in you?
Yeah, so I mean, not to I'm sure we'll get into some of the childhood stuff, but about the SEAL piece. But initially, right out of college, that option didn't work out for me. I just had some shoulder problems, and this was pre 9/11. And after had a minor surgery on my shoulder from playing ball in college. And then they said it was worse than they thought. So they had to go back in, do reconstructive surgery. And the Navy pretty much said, the first year I applied for it, I didn't get selected into the SEAL program. I was young and dumb and thought they would pick somebody like me right off the street. And so I said, no, it's 10-foot and bulletproof. I'll try again the next year. And that's when the shoulder issues happened. And so gave up what I thought was going to be in the military dream and left Florida, moved out to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And it was probably July, early August 2001. And weird deal. I had to go fill in at a different store for my company at the time. And there was this guy there. And much like you and I, he had wanted to be a SEAL. And we had that conversation, that little bro bonding moment. And he just said, man, have you read about this? You read this book, Black Hawk Down? And I said, I've heard of it, but haven't been reading much lately. So he's like, dude, you got to read it. So I stopped on the way home from work, picked it up, started reading that night, finished it in a couple of weeks. And man, you talk about just lighting the match again. I mean, just all those things beforehand that it made me want to serve just came rushing back, and sat down. I finished it. And, we talk about it in the book, not to be over dramatic, but it was a Tuesday night, and just sat down with my girlfriend at the time, eventual ex-wife, and just said, you're going to kill me, but we're finally making a little bit of money. Things are going okay, but I kind of want to give this military thing one more chance. And she came from a military family, very supportive of it. Just say, let's don't do anything rash right off the bat. Let's talk about it some. And that was on a Tuesday. And the next Tuesday was September 11th. And I was in the recruiter's office 2 days later.
Man, yeah, I remember reading that book at jump school. I think it was at Benning. I was like in ROTC, on one of those summer programs, and it was like, this sounds like the coolest thing ever. Mm-hmm. And it really just it kind of made me want to get into aviation, actually, but that's beside the point. I would ask, let's talk a little bit about the SEAL training, because I know you prepped for it. Where was the nugget of this? Where did that come from for you, the desire to be a SEAL?
Yeah, so part of it, I grew up in Destin, Florida, little beach town there in the Panhandle, spent my whole life in the water, could swim like a fish. And one of my best friends growing in it, now I won't lie, like anyone who from our era who says anything different is full of crap, but, saw Navy SEALs with Charlie Sheen and read all the Dick Marcinko books way back when.
Oh, yeah.
Like, these are the biggest badasses on the face of the earth. That's going to be me. I'm going to be one of those guys. And so, yeah, it was, it just seemed like a natural fit with the water piece of it. One of my good friends growing up, his dad had been a part of the SEAL teams back in Vietnam. And he was a crazy old dude, man, and had some screws loose up there. But for us young high school kids, Mr. Pete was just the coolest son of a bitch in the world, man. Everyone loved that guy. And he never talked about it, but we all kind of knew it. And so, yeah, so me and my buddy, we kind of had this, this little bro bond of, bro promise if we're going to go be SEALs together. And so man, we did all kind of crazy stuff. He played football at a different school, and we'd come home in the summers and we'd run, swim out in the Gulf of Mexico all the time. And we just thought of all the crazy ways, we could torture ourselves. We read up at the time, it's a different world, internet's just coming around. It's what you read in books. So yeah, we just tried to come up with whatever creative, crazy ways we could that made sense to a dumb, 20, 21-year-old at the time, of what can I do to prepare myself? And I know where you're going with this, so I will let you ask, but what can we do to punish ourselves to be best prepared for buds? And there's your softball, because I know it's coming.
Yeah. So this has to do with the lower extremities again. I feel like we just jumped straight past the foreplay here. But yeah, that is a pretty good story from the book. I would love to hear it with some context from you.
So one of the things you read about and talk with some other people, that was, you're cold water, but one of the things that really just sucks is you're not only freezing in the water, then you get out, you go roll around the sand, then you got to run. And everyone talks about how bad they get chafed, or at least I say everybody, the people I talk to, how bad they would get chafed. And so young dumbass Jeff was like, well, I'm going to prepare myself from that. So I would go out, I'd go swimming in the Gulf of Mexico. I would come back in and just literally pull my swim shorts out and throw a couple of handfuls of sand down my pants. And then I would go run a couple of miles, and I would just get chafed. I mean, just raw, like a a cowboy, just walking around all bow-legged and put Neosporin on it and be back out a few days later. And, at the time it made sense. So when I did my little SEAL fitness test, and my buddy's dad worked it out where I didn't go do it at a big base like everybody did. I got to go do a one-on-one. I grew up real close to Eglin Air Force Base and Hurlburt Field. And so the SEAL liaison at Hurlburt Field, he agreed to do the test one-on-one with me. And so I went out, did the swim, pull-ups, push-ups, sit-ups, all that, mile-and-a-half run, and BDUs and boots. And, and I'd been working my ass off. So did really well on the test. And this guy, man, and you read about it. I mean, just straight. I mean, you could have cast him in any of these movies. I mean, 6'3", sweet stash, short shorts. I mean, just an intimidating dude. Barely said 5 words to me the whole time. So we get done, and he kind of opens up. He's just like, "All right, buddy. Obviously, you're in good shape, man. You killed this test. More importantly, what are you doing mentally to get ready for this?" And I'm like, "This is my moment. This is where I get to share someone who's going to get it. Who understands." So I'm like, "Well, before I would go run, I hear this is a big problem. So I would throw sand down my pants." And I mean, and you can't do it justice. You almost have to visualize it. Like before I threw sand down my pants so I could prepare to chafe, he just said, just put his hand up. I mean, like that close in my face, and just said, "Stop." And so I stopped, and he's like, "What did you just say?" And I was like, "I would throw sand down my pants so I could get used to chafing." And he just crossed his arms and he looked at me, and just as calm as he could be, said, "Son, that is the dumbest fucking thing I've ever heard of in my life. That is like practicing getting kicked in the nuts." He's like, "Let me tell you something. If it doesn't make sense, don't do it." Completely deflated. I laugh about it now, but at the time, it was twofold. Like one, I looked like an idiot in front of this guy, but as time went on, the lesson learned from that day is something that, I didn't realize it at the time, obviously, but fast forward many years, in some pretty sticky situations where you got to make decisions. I was always kind of struck by how many times I went back to that simple phrase of, if it doesn't make sense, don't do it. So yeah, a lot of pain and misery, but I learned a pretty valuable life lesson. And I've had a lot of people, that has been the most commented on part of the book by far, from all my buddies, just giving me shit about it. And everybody, they're like, if they ever make this into a movie, we want to play that guy just so we can have that line.
Oh man, I got to say, it's almost like a gift to get that thing thrown at you at that age, instead of when most junior officers get it, which is from an NCO, like a platoon sergeant, pulling you to the side after you've done something stupid and saying that to you.
I agree.
It's just a matter of time before you get that.
Yep,
you got it early. So again, like a lot of commonalities, but I will say from the description in the book, Jeff, your childhood sounded a lot more difficult than mine. And I'm going to tee this one up with, could you tell us when you started making dinner for yourself?
Yeah, man, it was young, 6, 7 years old, single mom, not the best situation those first couple of years of my life. And, my mom's incredible, but, she did what she had to do, working 2-3 jobs to make ends meet, so it's a different world now. She'd get the police called on her, but yeah, I had an older brother. He was 2 years older than me. She would go, bartend, cocktail waitress at night at the country club down the street, and leave us at home alone. The security guard, small 1-bedroom apartment to start off, then we got a 2-bedroom, me and my brother shared it, and he would come by and check on us. And it was learning how to, start with sandwiches. And then before you know it, you're 6, 7 years, 8 years old, grounding ground beef, making spaghetti for yourself. And, my older brother, who's awesome, but, just the other events before that probably had a tougher toll on him than me, maybe because I was a little bit younger. So kind of just naturally early on took the lead in some of those things, and not trying to be the man of the house, but just, I was young and young enough, but also could realize what my mom was going through, that it wasn't normal. We weren't like our friends that, mom's not home at night. Then mom comes home and wakes you guys up, and you go deliver newspapers from 1 to 3 in the morning, and you're rolling them up in the back seat of the car. So, then you get up for school, then she gets up and goes to work again. So yeah, it was not the best situation in the world, but also I think the lessons learned from that of just resiliency from my mom and never giving up. And, we'll talk a lot about later the power of choice. And, she had many opportunities to choose to not do the hard thing, but she always chose. I say, so oftentimes, we all know the right thing to do, but it's usually the harder thing to do. And my mom always did the right thing.
God, how long did that I mean, was that until you kind of went off you left high school, Jeff, or was that limited to early on?
Yeah, she met my stepdad, I guess, when I was in second grade. They dated for a couple of years, then he moved in, and then having a second income in the house helped, and it was always, very humble, but, we're actually able to get out of apartments and actually got a house, I guess, when I was in sixth grade, moved into a home for the first time and then stayed there. It was always we always had to work, but it got better as the years went on.
Is there any part of you that wishes that it was easier for you at that time, or do you feel like that was kind of stealing you for what was coming later?
The easy, having children of my own now, I always say like, man, my kids are never going to have to go through some of the things that I did. But at the same time, it's the same things that I went through that I think ultimately kind of gave me the resolve that I have, the desire to stand up to bullies and to stand up for those that can't stand up for themselves. I don't know if I would have had a more privileged upbringing that may, what's it, nature versus nurture? I don't know the answer to that. What I do know is that's the situation I was dealt. And while it wasn't always easy, I wouldn't trade any bit of it.
Yeah. And then if we fast forward a bit to your high school days, Jeff, where did that kernel of I want to go serve, whether it was the SEAL thing or if it was just military in general, where did that come from, and at what point in your life did you start feeling that?
Yes, it started. I'd seen Navy SEALs at that point, but I wasn't really set on. That sounded cool, but what do I want to do when I grow up? So I'd say probably 1991 when Silence of the Lambs came out. I saw these FBI profilers, just thought that was the coolest movie in the world. Ironically, it was just on the other night. Just started doing some research and talking to people, and everyone said, well, the best way to get into federal law enforcement is, either or three ways really, be an accountant, have a law degree, or prior military. And God bless accountants. I appreciate there's a need for what they do. But that is, I would rather throw sand down my pants again, 365 days a year than be an accountant. The military was definitely an option, but I felt like the law degree route probably made the most sense because it would open up that door for me. And if that didn't work out, at least I had a pretty good fallback plan. So it was, so that started there. And then that was the plan. I kind of picked where I went to school, A off of football, but also Sanford had a great law school there, Cumberland School of Law, and thought being an undergrad there would probably help out. But it was halfway through, and you guys taking the LSAT, man. I had this epiphany of this is not what I want to do. I want to push myself. And I think a lot of that came from kind of going full circle back to high school sports you brought up earlier was, that kind of meek, soft kid who always had these internal things and always stood up for other people, but never stood up for myself and never really went after challenges. But once I finally did go out for football and get pushed by that just devil of a mean man, who's now one of the most inspirational people in my life, Coach Williams, after I stood up for myself and took that challenge on, I wanted more. And as I got into college, I realized really the only route for that for me was going to be in the military.
Why don't we jump to that story with Coach Williams? Because it reminded me of a story of another guy I interviewed, Eddie Penny, who's a former DevGru operator. But when he was in the Marines, he was going through, he got singled out by one of the drill instructors, pulled him over and just smoked the crap out of him. And he said, like, that was the day he became a man, basically changed from boy to a man. It's probably why he passed SEAL, like BUDS, and then got into DevGru later. So that story resonated with me. I'd love to hear from you here, a little more context of how that played out for you.
Yeah. So I played baseball all through life. Baseball just came naturally easy to me. I was always really fast. I was real little in high school. I was 5'9", 150 pounds. I mean, not that I'm big now, but it was real little, but I could run like the wind, was always the fastest guy, at the school. And just played baseball because baseball was easy. I didn't challenge myself. I didn't go take on, anything outside of my comfort zone. And a lot of friends of mine were always, you should go off of football, man, with the way you run. And just, no, man, I'm going to go do something else. Baseball is where it's at for me. And then it was my junior year of high school. And a guy many people probably heard the name before, Danny Werfel. I grew up with him, and he was a good friend of mine. And he was always one of the main ones trying to get me to come out for football. And historically, my high school had not been that great, but our junior year, they were pretty good. And then next year, we're expected to be really good. And Danny was, got some other people. So anyways, I decided to go out. So the defensive back coach, this guy named Steve Williams, and I always look for ways I can just say mean stuff about him, and I do it out of love. But it's also true. If he did some of the stuff, nowadays, if a coach did that stuff to kids, they would get literally arrested. I mean, he was just, I showed up, and I think it was the idea of, hey, here's this guy. I didn't go looking for this guy. I got some pretty good players already, but the head coach is telling me I need to have a look at this young athletic kid who's never played football in his life and give him a shot and see what we could do. And the first way to do that was he just tested me mentally to see what I was made of. And, like I talked about before, that was not my comfort zone. And I came home and I dog cussed him every night. He was just so mean to me. Talk about just pulling me aside, letting everybody else go after practice, keeping me around, up, down, smoking the shit out of me, just basically telling me how bad I sucked. Why don't I go back to the baseball field? You name it. I mean, just mean stuff for a coach. But he just wanted to see if I would stick with it. And, my mom always had this thing of, if you start something, you will finish it. Doesn't mean you got to go back the next year and do it, but you will never quit on anything. And so I was locked in. So yeah, that was that spring of my junior year when I went out for football. It kept up all through the summer. And then we had this camp at the, right before basically our 2 days, we went to this camp a couple hours away, and just a miserable 2 weeks, and probably the hardest he ever was on me. And at the end of it, a couple of weeks before our first game, he pulled me aside and just said, hey man, things are going to be different now. I just wanted to push you to see if you would put up with it. And you did. I'm going to coach you hard. I'm going to push you hard, but I'm done trying to make you quit because, I see what you're made of now. And I tell people, and there's that quote in the book, he was the one that said it of, boys do what they want to do, men do what they have to do. And I always say, like, that's who turned me into a man. Maybe not at 17 years old, but it set the foundation for it for sure.
That's cool. What a story, man. As you described kind of that move into like pursuing law, you're sitting there taking the LSAT, you have this epiphany, or, this is not the right path. Did you end up discussing that with anybody afterwards? You talked to your brother. How did your mom receive it when you're like, I just got to get out of here and do something else?
I just went back and my mom asked me how it was. And I said, well, I don't think I did as good as I did on the practice test. She was like, what do you mean? And I was like, I don't want to go to law school. And, like any mom, she wasn't crazy about it, but I think she recognized pretty early on in life that I was, of her 3 children, because her and my stepdad ended up having a son as well, that I was the one that was going to probably go out and find my own way. So she just, she cried, scared to death, but said, go be you.
I got to say, it's got to be 85 or 90% of the guys who I talk to that they make their moms cry with decisions at that age, like almost every time.
Oh yeah.
Especially if they're a Marine. Moms tend to really cry when they hear their kids become a Marine, and then they love it later on.
Exactly. Yep.
Oh man. All right. So what's the time difference between you kind of making that decision? I know then you go into another line of work, 9/11 happens. Like how long are we talking before you get into the military?
Yeah, so it's probably summer of '96 when I made that decision. I'm like, all right, get through the next year of school. I had a year left, my senior year of football. And then really that second semester started focusing on, because I didn't do ROTC or anything. So went out and started talking to recruiters, and, they all told me the same thing, like, man, going in as an officer, as a SEAL, it's just not going to happen. But again, I'm 10 foot and bulletproof, like many 21, 22-year-olds think we are. So yes, I started the application. I got home, graduated in May. And at the time, and I could be off, this is just what my recruiter told me. He said, there's one board every year, they've already had it. So you can't you can't get in this year. So I moved back to Florida and just, got my old summer job working at a movie theater, trained like crazy, threw sand down my pants like a dumbass, kept doing all that. And then after a couple of months, I left and moved back to Birmingham, Alabama, just to party with my friends and, got a job and actually make a little bit of money. Same thing. So that would have been, I guess, May of '98. He said same thing. They've already filled them up this year. Don't even worry about putting a packet in. So I'm like, all right, I got to get serious. I'm now a year and a half out of school and I'm really doing nothing. So I'm like, I'm going all in this next year. And so that's when I went in and, that's when, so I should say the first year is when he said, don't put a packet in. The second year, I didn't get it. And so the third year is when I said, all right, let's go all in on this. And that's when I started having the shoulder problems. And so, yeah, I had my first surgery early 2000 and it was April of 2000, just a minor scope on my shoulder. Then he said, it looked worse when we got in there. So then it was August of 2000 when he said, hey man, we're never going to take you like this. So I'm like, all right, I got to do something. So yeah, I gave up on the military dream, moved out to Dallas, early 2001, 9/11 happens, obviously September. And then ironically, what's funny is, so when I was going through the application process for the Navy, I grew up in Destin, Florida, world's luckiest seafood fishing village, and I'm allergic to all seafood. And the Navy had no issue with that. So I applied for the Army. I'm going to the Army this time. They bless off on my shoulder, a year removed from surgery. And then they medically disqualify me for the seafood allergy. So that's why I had, from the time right after 9/11, it was another over a year before I shipped off for basic training, because about 6 months of that time was spent trying to get a waiver for my seafood allergy. So yeah, so I shipped off, decided I'm going to do it summer of '96. It was October of 2002 when I finally shipped off to basic training.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Again, similarities. I mean, I started in the summer of '02 as well, like commissioned in May, and then got started right at the outset of the fight, interesting timing. If you can, there are some good stories in the book about the people you learned from as you went through training, right? Like some of these guys that really took you under their wing, saw something in you, like a little more mature. I'd love to touch on that and then jump into that first unit experience if we could. Yeah. But if you can, like some of the memorable moments that you share in the book about these guys who kind of take you in during the training sessions.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And so, I go to basic training because I don't have any experience. And, so I'm 28 years old and co-ed basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, which is kind of a joke. But the drill sergeant, I think I touched on it some in the book of, he saw I was older, kind of had my act together, and they were, undermanned. So I would do things to help them out. And he would reward me by, he'd come in and screaming my name. I'd go down to his office and he would turn a football game on and let me watch a game. Then he'd make me do a bunch of push-ups before I left and throw water on my face. So I went up and told everybody that I got smoked. He was all pissed off at me. But yeah, so then I went off to officer candidate school, which, sorry, Army, but that was the dumbest 14 weeks of my life. What a freaking
Was it at Rucker?
No, it was at Benning.
Benning.
Benning. Yeah. Just, how do you take a course and I get why you do it, but you can't go and create a leader of men and women in 14 weeks. It's just, so they got to do things to try to put you in stressful situations. And frankly, they're just stupid, but you do it. But for me, what was most impactful about that is, and I think what you're getting to is, OCS is a combination of guys like me coming off the street. It's also, prior service, green to gold, guys coming in, men and women coming in. And I was real fortunate. My roommate was a prior service E6, Rangerback guy. And then the guys that we shared a bathroom with, one was a prior service E7 SF guy, a guy named Matt Mousseau, who I talk a lot in the book, still a very close friend of mine. And then the other guy was actually an E8, who was one of those guys made 8 in 8 years. I mean, Chunka Smith, just a freaking sharp dude, awesome guy, just retired, I think, lieutenant colonel, I believe, or maybe just made lieutenant, I can't remember, but awesome guy. Yes, I mean, those three were kind of, my little small world of existence at the time. And they were the ones like, Jeff, this is dumb as shit. Don't listen to these guys. This is what you got to focus on when you get in front of your men. We were there. We had young lieutenant, young platoon leaders show up. This is what you got to focus on. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if they saw something in me or what it was, but they just, without realizing it, just by taking me under their wing, and it wasn't any kind of like profound wisdom on one particular topic. It was just seeing how they handled themselves, how cool, calm, and collected they always were, that you could take an absolutely shitty situation where things are just stupid and find a way to laugh in it. When we're out doing some of these dumb training exercises they had us do, which is kind of instilled in me of, hey, no matter how bad things get, you can always find a way to laugh during that time. And I could tell you some just freaking hilarious stories of shit that happened with those guys. But yeah, to me, it was just a perfect example of what I needed at that time to kind of give me the confidence that, right, if these guys, I'm going to go be standing in front of E6s and E7s pretty soon. And for whatever reason, these guys see something in me, just keep doing what I'm doing, listen to them. And, when I get to my unit, listen to those guys and hopefully have make the same impression on them.
And it sounds like you do have the same impression, like that's one of the takeaways here. And I've got some quotes from guys who you serve with that are pretty interesting that I'll share in a bit. But I'd like to jump to your role as a platoon leader. So if you can kind of give us the lead up to your first combat deployment, kind of what role are you in, what's the unit, and where are you going, and the time frame, and set us up for that first deployment you had.
Okay. So yeah, so I was basic training or officer candidate school, then infantry officer basic course, then airborne school, and then went off to Ranger school. You get a story or a tab, and I got a story. I got hurt at Ranger school, had to have surgery on my knee. So that was January of 2004. So I knew I was going to first Cav at that time. I didn't know which brigade or battalion, of course, but it got delayed because I had to rehab and, I had to get blessed off on the dock. So I bring that up because I actually got to Fort Hood a couple of weeks after first Cav had deployed. So I got there in process, then was on a plane. At this point, I knew I was going to 3rd Brigade, didn't know which battalion I was going to. But yeah, I knew I would be in Baghdad, somewhere in central, at that time, 3rd Brigade was kind of spread out, but the headquarters was there in the international zone. And got there, they told me I was going to 19 Cav, which was based just north of the international zone, right outside Haifa Street. But 19 had kind of been dispersed a little bit. So Charlie Company 19 was up there at Muthanna Airfield, right off of Haifa Street. Alpha 19 had been detached to an Arkansas National Guard company, which is based out of the National Guard Battalion, 153rd. So I'm spending all my time up at Muthanna. I'm told I'm going to take over as a platoon leader. So I get there, that is May of 2004. And then July, I get the call of, all right, I spend the first couple of months just going out and shadowing other, I'm working in the S2 shop, but my real job is to shadow other platoon leaders. Learned a ton from those guys, just go out and, things on Haifa Street were getting pretty hot and heavy at that point, and learn for some great young officers and great NCOs. Wait for my opportunity to take over one of those platoons, and then get the call of, hey, we're going to send you down to Alpha Company, down to the international zone.
After you'd already kind of met all these other guys.
Yeah, you're planning. I mean, they said, like, you're going to take over this guy. So I went out with them all the time, and building up a relationship. To now I'm going to not only, a bunch of people I'd never met, but also they're in a part of Baghdad where they're patrolling south of the international zone. I mean, you remember it, down to the penis. I forget what the whole thing is called, with the river wraps around it. And I mean, it's Baghdad University there. I mean, like, nothing is happening in that area. And so, I mean, the mindset, you want to be where the action's at. And so now I'm this whole new group of people that I don't know. I'm in a slow ass area. Nothing's going to happen. It's not what I signed up for. But then the call was made because of how bad things were getting on Haifa Street to move Alpha Company up to, to basically go be a part of Task Force 19 as a whole. So that was early August of 2004 when we went up there pretty much full time. And I mean, it was nonstop,
then Jeff,
man.
Yeah. So I want to get into the nonstop, but just quickly, what was the kind of task organization you guys had? So I know for part of your career, you've got Bradley's there. What was the how are you guys configured and what was your role as a platoon leader? How many guys were you in charge of at the time? What's the size of that platoon at that time?
Yeah, so we were mechanized infantry, so all Bradleys. At the time, we could still go out in Humvees, and we took Humvees out pretty often down south when I was patrolling that slow area. Up on Haifa Street, when I first got there, you could still go out in Humvees at first, but unfortunately, while I was still up there shadowing, in fact, the platoon that I had been told I was going to take over, unfortunate incident where RPG was shot through the windshield of one of the Humvees and decapitated and killed the soldier. So after that, there's a picture we all share all the time. It's like Haifa Street is condition red. So like you couldn't go on Haifa Street unless you were in a fully armored vehicle, you know, a Bradley or a M1 tank. But yeah, so mechanized, 4 Bradleys, started off with 35 men under my command. One of the guys was hurt in an accident, although everyone will tell you, this is right after I took over. Right about the time we got word we were going to start going to Haifa Street, he fell off a Humvee and tore some ligaments in his knee and got sent home. So I always say I had 34 under me that deployment. Yeah.
Got it. And then just before we jump into the action, can you just talk a little bit about what a Bradley looks like on the inside? Like how many guys go in that? I've never been in one. I've definitely been above them, but it's kind of new to me. I'm just curious, like what's the weapons load if you recall?
The easiest way to sum it up without talking about the weapons, I'm sure you and every one of your listeners has used the term, 10 pounds of shit in a 5-pound bag. That sums up a Bradley pretty well. You're up there, so you got the driver up in the front, then you got the turret. In the turret, you got the gunner on the left, and you got the Bradley commander on the right. As a platoon leader, you're kind of the unique situation where you ride and you carry all the dismounts in the back. As a platoon leader, you sit in the Bradley commander's chair when you're in movement, and then whenever you stop and dismount, the platoon leader gets out of the vehicle. You have a jump gunner, and so then they would partner me up with the most senior gunner, and then so when I would get out, he would move over to the Bradley commander chair, and then we would have a jump gunner get in and fill his place. Then I would go, you drop the ramp in the back, dismounts, get out. You're supposed to be able to fit a 9-man squad in the back of a Bradley. I guess you could, but couldn't breathe back there with all the equipment and shit you're carrying. But yeah, man, it's hot, it's loud. From weapon system, you got a 25 millimeter, we call it cannon on the front. I think it holds, I forget the exact capacity, maybe 260. I'm making shit up, but a couple hundred rounds, 25. And then you got a 240 gun in there as well. So it can
keep going, Jeff. Sorry.
I was just gonna say it can put some it can put some rounds down range very quick.
And how did it absorb rounds?
We had to up armor. If someone shoots at it, it's not going to do a thing. Now, IEDs, obviously the concussive blast of that. We had the reactive armor on the side that if explosion hit IED, it explodes out. Generally with Bradleys and a lot of our vehicles like that, traditional IEDs, they would try to detonate them underneath. It's weaker under there. We didn't have a big IED problem that first deployment. It was true, urban fighting. A lot of grenades thrown. Early on, we were stupid. We would always ride around. We called it Dick Defilade. We would stand outside the Bradley commander's hatch, stand in your seat so you could see everything. And all it took was, a couple of grenades thrown your way and having to drop down real quick. So after that, it was hatch down all the time. But yeah, it absorbed things pretty well. Now, and we'll get there. You fast forward to the EFPs, a Bradley couldn't do anything to those things. It
would just tear through them.
Oh yeah. But we'll get to that.
So one last thing, because I found this pretty interesting in the book. It sounds like the difference between the mission set for deployment 1 and 2 for you is pretty significant, right? Like kind of in the surge for the second deployment, and we'll get there. But for this first one, it sounded a bit more like deliberate. You go out for something in particular, as opposed to just patrolling for all day long. What was the mission set you guys had in 04? As you get ready to tell us about what it's like when you get out there, like what were you tasked to go out and do most days?
Yeah, I would say most of the missions were very target specific. We had some movement to contacts. Those were usually done in support of, we learned the enemy TTPs, and you learned that sometimes you have to draw them out. So we did have some missions that were just kind of, it seemed like get out and go walk around, but there was a very specific purpose of that. It wasn't a whole lot. I mean, there was some security stuff, go provide for this event going on, especially like the elections, for example. But most everything was pretty specific. Your mission statement was, not go conduct, whatever, just go drive around till you get blown up type thing. It was a very specific, usually short durations. We weren't looking to go and be out there for 4 or 8 hours just to have presence in sector. It was, you had a mission and you had a commander's intent of what you were trying to accomplish. And it was something that was really easy to rally around as opposed to the next go around.
God, that's just so interesting to hear, because I think people listen to that and they're like, of course, it's a mission with commander's intent, but what you experience the second go around is not at all that case, right? So let's jump now. The first time you're rolling outside the wire where you could get hurt with take it however you want, with the initial folks that you were supposed to replace, or with the platoon that you are actually in charge of. Like that first time you're rolling out of the wire, what did that feel like for you, and what was the operation?
I think the first time, I remember that adrenaline rush the first time actually doing it. Probably more so going out when I was just shadowing people. Then I didn't necessarily have the responsibility of what I had, because the first time I had that responsibility, I knew I might as well have been going out driving around downtown Dallas. There wasn't a whole lot that was going to happen down there. Now, when we got moved up to Haifa Street, I remember a whole different set of fear. I think it's okay to acknowledge that. It sounds hokey, but the burden of command, like the first time of, hey, something may go down and I may have to. I think that's when it really hit me of, I may be making, you think about it before, but you never know until you're in that moment. There's luckily the first few times we went out, nothing happened, but the first time we were engaged, and I'm very open about it, scared the shit out of me, scared the shit out of all of us. And we all kind of froze and didn't react. But I think and I had great NCO leadership. We went back and basically made ourselves talk about it and acknowledge the fact that we all didn't react how we were trained. And that was okay. No one got hurt, but the next time we may not be that lucky. And I think it didn't immediately make us this wildly successful combat, but I think this combat unit, but I think having that hard conversation and acknowledgement early on set the foundation for us to go and do some really good things as things continue to get hotter and hotter.
Yeah. If you take us to one of those missions on Haifa Street, and I mean, certainly you got one where 2 guys come away with silver stars, I believe, if I read that correctly.
Yeah, they weren't, those guys, they didn't serve in my platoon. They were in, so I was first platoon. Those guys were from second platoon, but they were right next to us.
If you could just talk through one of those missions. To me, it was really interesting, Jeff, just especially because I had been a pilot, like never have that perspective, certainly not with Bradley around. Like I'd just love to hear from you. One of those ops when you were a platoon leader that was really difficult for you, especially you got the burden of command. You're young at the time, and it's some stiff resistance, as you described. Like later on, the enemy kind of blends in and is a little harder to find. And it seems like this first time around, that's not the case.
Yeah, no, man, it was like they came out to fight, and I think probably the best example is September 12th, 2004. That's the day you're referencing, and kind of the way it worked is, it was just constant harassing grenades from the insurgents would go and pay the local populace to harass us with grenades, and every now and then some small arms fire. But literally, and there's a lot of layers to it, because they're giving these grenades to teenagers and young kids sometimes, and the moral dilemma that we put our young men in, I say men here because we were all men, until you see a 9-year-old kid throw a grenade at you, or one of your buddies, do you shoot him? What if you don't shoot him? Then the next day he's back. So there was that element of it. So they would, that was sort of the daily, we were 60, I don't know what the exact numbers were, but 60, 70% of the time we rolled out outside the gate, we were engaged in some capacity. It could be 2 grenades, it could be 50 grenades and 20 RPGs. So they would harass us like that. And then every once a month, month and a half. I mean, there was no set pattern. Then the insurgents would like stage a big coordinated attack against us. And September 12th just happened to be one of those days. And we had done this TTP of, we would go conduct our mission, we would leave. And as soon as we would leave, the insurgents would come out the street to scare off, the local populace. So, well, look at us, we ran off the mighty Americans. So we started partnering up with some special ops, and that's when we started working with the SEALs a lot, bringing in their snipers, and we would go with large groups, occupy multiple buildings, and then leave. But we would leave back, very risky, a team of 6 SEAL snipers with 1 squad to provide security for them. And it worked like magic the first time. They just started picking guys off in the streets left and right. It's the Army. Hey, this works, man. Let's do it over and over and over again. So eventually they got wise and figured out what was going on. So September 12th was just the perfect storm of events. There was a local mosque there where everything was run out of. They had staged, Al-Qaeda in Iraq was going to film a propaganda video that day. And we had one of those missions, and it just happened. This was going to be the largest and longest stay behind mission that we had. And we had, I think it was 9 SEALs and maybe 9 to 12 of our scout platoon were going to provide security. So we went in wee hours of the morning, dropped these guys off. They were supposed to be in that building for 48 hours. It was a series of 17-story buildings there on Haifa Street. And 3rd platoon, so we're an Alpha company. So 3rd platoon had to go and occupy Chalil Square, which was the main intersection where a lot of the shit went down. My platoon was the ones responsible for dropping the SEALs off and helping them carry all their gear and water and food for a couple of days. And then 2nd platoon was pulling rear security at the intersection behind us. So drop off went great, and we left. It's probably 5 in the morning or so. We were engaged by multiple RPGs, which that rarely ever happened at night. And so fast forward, we get back to the gate. We're like, something's up. And as we're pulling in the gate, we get the call from headquarters to don't even come back up here. We were going to be on QRF. They're like, stay at the gate. Shit's going down. And I think the criteria had been, 5 military-age males with a weapon. The SEALs could engage. And I got a video of it. One of the scouts took it, and you just see them coming out of the mosque. And I mean, it's probably 50 dudes just, staggered formation, walking down each side of Haifa Street, with their head stuff on, PKs, AKs, you name it, man, RPGs. So it's kind of, what do we do? Do we engage? So they let them engage, and everybody quickly figured out where stuff was coming from. So the insurgents started really trying to collapse around that building as much as they could. So we got the word to go back into the same formation to get them out. And I just remember driving up Haifa Street, and when 3rd platoon hit Tillil Square, and it was just like fucking 4th of July, man. I mean, it's literally just stuff crossing both ways, tracer rounds, RPGs from both sides being shot at them. It was nuts. So we pulled up in front of the building, dropped our dismounts, and at the time, and stupid, it's risky for me. I shouldn't say risky. The technical way to get up at Bradley is there's a little door in the turret, you climb out. But when you open that door and I'm climbing out to join the dismounts, you're leaving the ramp down longer, more exposure for RPG fire to come inside the Bradley. But 2, the gunner can't traverse, because it would catch me. So most of the time, the way we did it is we would just jump out the top of the hatch. And so yeah, that day I went to jump out the top of the hatch and saw a guy staring at me with an RPG, and quickly went back down in the hatch. But was finally able to get out and go in there and, circle up with the men. And at this point,
Jeff, did that dude take a shot at you?
He did. It was not close. It was one of those, pop around the corner, fire and forget. So I'm never going to embellish it and say, but it was enough that, and you probably read about it. My gunner, who's this old grouchy son of a bitch who I know will listen to this, because he's an awesome friend. And it was just, and again, back to how you can just be calm in these crazy moments. I mean, there's shit going on everywhere. And I just sort of dropped back down. I'm kind of like, whew. And he just looks over at me. He's like, second time in my life I've heard this, sir. That's the dumbest fucking thing I've ever seen. And then he starts traversing and shooting shit again. I mean, it was awesome. But I was finally able to get out, link up with the men. We linked up with the SEALs. Those guys were great. They're like, hey, look, man, you got the command and control. You know what's going on. Where do you need us?
Wow.
And then just tell us what we can do. Where can we support? Given that dynamic, and you hear these stories and then like bullying guys around. My experiences were nothing like that. Guys were professional as hell. So we, set up our perimeter best we could. We're kind of surrounded on all sides, just constant grenades being thrown over the wall. We were pretty safe from that, but a lot of small arms fire from the building next to us that they had occupied. They had the high ground shooting down at us. So it really kind of pinned us inside the breezeway on the bottom floor of the building we were in. And so, yeah, man, we pulled a Bradley up and, just said, go black. And clean that building out. And I mean, just started zigzagging down the side, and it was just this awesome. I mean, me and literally just like stop. I mean, we're sitting ducks. Like me and one of my team leaders just like dropped our weapons and just staring at it. And like it was just hear the whole thing. Like war can be beautiful, as crazy as that sounds. I mean, it really was. And so yeah, then things kind of got crazy again. A car bomb got in through second platoon's security, and we had our command and control, over the company command and control vehicles, our company commander who was on the ground, but it actually ended up being our XO's vehicle, but he was on leave, so somebody else was occupying it. And yeah, so we got hit by a car bomb not too far from me, blew me up, I should say blew me up, threw me into a railing, messed my back up a little bit.
Shrapnel or was it just the concussion?
The concussion of it. Yeah, it was so powerful. But yeah, there were some guys in the vehicle, and so one young kid, the vehicle caught on fire, and one young kid from second platoon, because it was closer to them, and at the time they weren't engaged in fire like we were. So like we had this blast go on that blows out all the windows and the breezeway we're in, blows a few of us over. We're getting shot at, grenades thrown at us, and then so yeah, this young kid, man, freaking stud. Just everybody, I don't want to say those guys froze, but no one really knew what to do. And he just ran out by himself and jumped on top of the Bradley and got the hatch up and started, smoke everywhere, kind of directing the guys to get out. And then, literally it's funny. So he got a silver star for that. But what's funny about it is he basically called out, got on the radio, and it's just like, why don't somebody else, you guys stop being pussies? How about somebody get out, come over here and help me? And no, again, the other guys, I'm not saying they were, that's just what I heard. Like they were doing other stuff. But so this other guy, he ran out there and jumped on top of the vehicle, and he was this giant dude. I mean, just a huge man. So that's the one that everyone saw. So he was actually put in for a Distinguished Service Cross. And then it got downgraded to a Silver Star. And then there were a lot of guys in the unit that were really pissed off that only he got it and the young kid didn't, because he's the one that did it first. And it was just one of those things. The story hadn't made it up to change it their chain yet, and so they did. So yeah, he got the Silver Star for that as well. And then we had our stuff going on. We had a couple of guys get hurt, a couple of the scout platoon guys get hurt from grenades, and so I had to carry one of my guys out and had to do some other things that were. So anyway, that's the day that I got the my thing for it, and.
Yeah. So Jeff, I mean, if I read it correctly, like there's a grenade that comes in, you pull two guys out of the way. Is that right? Is that the day that we're talking about?
Yeah.
Could you, I know you're very humble. Could you just talk about what is the environment? Were you in the breezeway, an alleyway? Like where were you at when this was going on?
So the breezeway is the bottom floor of this condominium. And so it's, U-shaped on the bottom, and you walk in, think of strip mall. There's like a 10-foot overhang that's just open before you walk in the doors to get inside. Yeah. So we're all occupying, that breezeway behind pillars. The front of the building is facing Haifa Street here. The building over, if you're looking at the building on the right is where we had taken all that fire, where we brought the Bradley in, and the left, we're getting engaged over there. Behind it is all the slum areas, and that's where they're just chucking grenades over the wall and reaching up over and taking pop shots. So most of us are facing out, and you say, I mean, yes, part of it's being humble. Part of it's also a little bit of embarrassment, because the grenade was my grenade that ended up injuring these guys. I didn't throw it. We kept trying to throw grenades over the wall in the slum area, and we couldn't reach them. And so this one guy said, "I'm out of grenades. Does anybody have one?" And I said, "Yeah, take mine." And so I gave it to him, and I just happened to turn and watch it. And when he threw it, he didn't get out past the overhang enough, and he threw it and it hit inside the lip of the breezeway and started rolling back. Now, again, it's rolling behind people, and they're all facing out. No one sees it. And there's a fine line between valor and stupidity and just plain luck. And just then I did a rough guess. And so I ran over and grabbed the back of two of my guys who were facing out and just hoped. And luckily it worked out. The grenade rolled on one side of the pillar and I was able to get them off that side and pull them around to the other side. So it detonated very close to us, but behind, a 3-foot big chunk cement barrier.
And
But that grenade went off and hit a couple of other people.
The guys you pulled down, did they get hit with shrapnel or anything?
They did not. Ironically,
Wow.
So on that day, and usually platoon leaders, you don't have an RTO, but because of that day and certain times we would, and we laughed. He's a great guy. Ended up a Ranger dude, and the guy's just a stub. He was young, E4 at the time, and so he was carrying the radio for me that day. And he always laughed because he saw it too. And the story afterwards was, he's like, I saw the grenade and I saw your dumbass running towards it. So I went and ran the other way. And he ended up getting a tiny bit in his leg. He was okay. Another one of my guys had a pretty nice chunk of shrapnel in his leg. But one of the scouts, it got hit and it looked really minor. But the piece of shrapnel got in his bloodstream and ended up getting lodged in his heart. And he almost died when we got to the cache, to the hospital there.
Was the E4 that you're talking about, was he like, if LT's running at me, something's wrong and I'm going to run the other way? Like,
yeah, pretty much. Yeah, so we gave him a hard time. He's like, I ran the other way and I get hit. You run towards it and you're fine. But again, man, it's just, it's just luck at the end of the day.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
Damn. I'm just trying to imagine.
So it was quite the day, man.
So if at the time your platoon's 34 people, you're all out on this op, not that you would remember this in detail, but if you do, I'm just curious, like you're in that breezeway in that building that you just described. How many of your guys in your platoon are in there? Is it all of them or are they spread out? Like where are they at as this is going on if you don't have an RTO, and how are you communicating with them?
So it's a pretty big building. So we kind of, all right, one squad, on one side, the other squad facing out, other squad over there was working with the SEALs. We had gone and asked them to go up to the floors above us because they had, a better shots than us, probably, I would venture to say. And most of them were, sniper rifles. So they're looking to pick people off and be a little more stealth about it. And then we also had the crews and the Bradley. So you think of those 34, 8 are occupying 4 vehicles.
Got it.
And then you probably got a guy or two on leave. We'd already had a couple of guys get hurt by that point. So they were out. So yeah, I would say probably on the ground there, area we were occupying, probably 18 to 20 of my guys, or maybe 20 to 24. And then the SEALs, 9 of them, and then the scouts. So that whole larger group. So I had my guys, but that whole larger group kind of fell under, I guess, my command for that.
Yeah.
For that short period.
How are you communicating with them then? Like the guys in the Bradley, it sounds like there's comms, but if you don't have an RTO, are you just carrying your own radio?
Yeah, so we had multiple things, so I had, we all had little walkie-talkies that we kind of talked internally, say walkie-talkies, just little radios that we would talk, amongst dismounts on the ground. Each squad leader had the capability to talk to the Bradleys as well. And then what I did, whenever it was a larger mission set like that, and it was going to involve, I could handle all the internal comms and talking on company net. I could handle that. But in something like this, they wanted interaction with battalion as well. And those are the days I would have an RTO with me, basically just to, if I had to get on the ground. Most everything ran through the company op. It was basically just another radio instead of me having to carry a pocket radio or company one on my back and a battalion one on my back. And that deal with switching frequencies and crap.
Right. Damn. Okay. So that sounds like a significant event for you. After that grenade explodes, how long is it until you guys are exfilling that area?
Probably another hour, I would say. At least another hour. Yeah. And it was, because again, at the time, none of the injuries were bad. We didn't start realizing the guy stuff was in his heart until we got to the cache. There was no urgency to evac the casualties. It was more about securing the area. So yeah, man, that's when I always tell them, Google September 12th, 2004, Haifa Street. Shit got crazy. Vehicle was burning. We left. They went out and all the insurgents and local innocents occupied it. There's all kind of pictures. It was all over Yahoo News and Fox News, front page of their website, this burning American vehicle with the old Al-Qaeda in Iraq, Tawhid and Jihad flag stuck in the barrel. These people, there was a reporter, it wasn't Al Jazeera, another Middle Eastern news agency. They were reporting live, and that's when the decision was made because of some of the sensitive equipment left in that Bradley, some of the encryption devices they didn't realize at the time was to bring in the Kiowas and go in and shoot some hellfires into it and destroy it. So that happened, killed a bunch of Iraqis, killed that reporter live on air, and really, yeah, it was a lot went into that day.
God. All right. So just after that grenade goes off, I'm just curious, in your mind, did you realize like that was almost it? I almost died right here. Or are you just in the moment, like, I got to get up and keep moving. I can't take even a second to think about that.
I remember like just thinking like, holy shit, that was lucky. And then you just get on, you kind of stop and reflect about that. And I'm not trying to sound cool at all. I mean, anyone who's been in any kind of stressful situation, usually you don't acknowledge at the moment. It's after the fact where you're like, holy shit. Yeah, but there was a split second where my ears were ringing like crazy and they're yelling at me because they don't know why, what the fuck's going on? You pulled me, and they hear it, then they kind of put two and two together, and then it's just like checking to make sure. I mean, guys are screaming because they're hurt, shattered their windows. It was pretty chaotic scene there. So it was just trying to normalize things.
And then how about when you got back to base that day? Like you finally are inside the wire, you're relatively safe. Mm-hmm. How did you process that experience that day, if at all?
I think it was, we were leaving, and one of the young soldiers who just never talked, a great soldier, never talked a whole lot. We're just sitting there, and at that point, right in the back of the Bradley, didn't even deal with trying to get back in. And he just went, holy shit, man, we were on point today. And so I think everybody, we felt good. We felt like we did it right, not perfect, but, from a month prior when we all froze and did nothing, then at that point we've been in, what ended up being probably the longest sustained fight in Baghdad that year, outside of the Sadr City uprising, for multiple days, but like one singular event, that was one of the largest, and we were at the heart of it. We felt like we did it right. So we felt good. We talked about it, learned how can we get better, did our AARs, but we felt pretty damn good about what we did that day.
That's cool. I want to jump. I mean, there's like plenty of stories that you have from that deployment, let alone the others. I want to jump to maybe your second deployment. And the reason is, correct me if I'm wrong here, Jeff, at the time when you go into your second deployment, you're initially kind of an acting company commander, and then you're kind of blessed off as you are the company commander going into this next rotation, which is, I mean, that's no joke. I think if I read, like, you still had a lieutenant bar on when they said that, and then you got promoted to captain.
Yeah, so I was a platoon leader for 9 months. I was an XO for 5 months. And then I was put in command that was supposed to be temporary for 90 days. And there's a whole other story that, not worth the listener's time here of, it's not that I was good. It's just that because of some reorganization, I was the most senior lieutenant. And so they asked me if I would take command because I was putting my SFAS packet in to go off to the selection. And they're like, well, hey, if you do this temporary command while we wait for a captain to show up, then we'll guarantee you 90 days. So that way you get it on your service record. And then once a captain shows up, you can leave and go do your selection thing. Hopefully make it. If not, off to Benning and the career course and all that stuff you'll do. So yes, it was a little over 90-day mark. Another captain showed up and I got the call. And, all right, thanks for what you did. And instead, they just said, hey, we got a pretty good idea of where we're going. And because of the reorganization, Alpha 19, who I'd gone to be the XO of Charlie 19, so now Charlie 19 was now Bravo 18, had a different name, and the rest of 18 had not seen as much contact as we had that first deployment. And my battalion and brigade commander knew we were going to another really bad area, and they liked the idea of having a combat tested, group of leaders together. So they asked me if I would delay my SFAS packet till we came back, and they would put in a waiver since I would be a captain then. You're supposed to go as a first lieutenant promotable. But yeah, so I took command in October of 05 as a, couple of months into being a first lieutenant. Got promoted to captain about a year later when we were at NTC. My guys jumped me and beat the shit out of me. which that's when I knew they liked me. I'm like, if they would have left me alone, it would have been all right. But they put a good beat down on me. But yeah, it was a unique set of circumstances, and incredibly fortunate to have that opportunity with this basically the same group of men over 2 deployments.
So what you were just talking about, the guys jumping you and they actually liked you, that's what I wanted to zoom in on just for a minute, right? Because not everybody has this type of respect from the people they serve with, that especially as an officer. So these are just a couple quotes I pulled from podcasts you've been on that guys who it sounds like knew you said. I'm just going to read 3 of them. Captain Jeff Moore saved me and the rest of the team members on Haifa Street during one of the most horrific ambushes. Thankful he and his men, what they've done, it helped us come out of there alive. And he's referring to a part of the interview. That's a part I will never forget in my whole life. Then Captain Morris was my CO in Bravo 18. I would follow him into hell itself. And then Orlando Garcia had one. Was he your first sergeant?
He was my first sergeant, the second go around.
Right. So like this,
best man at my wedding.
This right here says to me says a lot, knowing he was your first sergeant, right? Like Mike really enjoyed this podcast, Jeff. He's leaving out parts where I probably made his job a lot harder because of my interactions with our command group, but he always had my back. So look, man, I don't have guys who would say that about me. I think that says a whole hell of a lot about a CO, especially a young one like you. I mean, I guess you weren't young, right? Because you came in a little bit later, but junior in rank. So my question to you is, it looks like you really focused on building camaraderie when you knew you were taking these guys in. Whereas some people might just think that it happens organically with training, but like this mud wrestling thing you put on, this day-long exercise, I swear to God, I'd like you to talk about it, because to me, I'd be like, I'm not going to do that. That's going to take forever. The guy's already got enough going on. But you seem to like cultivate this. So I want to talk a little bit about how you did this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you talk about the Legion squad competition, the all-day thing that was not supposed to go that long, probably completely poor planning on my part. Ended up going in the middle of the night, but the mud wrestling competition at the end, which we knew just basically turned into a set of the squads fighting each other. It was each squad picking a leader and jumping us, and like I had my mouth full of mud. I mean, it was crazy. But I mean, I think some of it is, we all have our own styles, and I'm not saying my style's right. There's a lot of great leaders out there who lead in different ways. But, one thing that was the way I looked at it is, I'm not ever going to be the smartest guy in the room. I'm not going to be the best shot in the room. I'm not going to probably be the best at anything in the room, except for one thing. I'm probably the best at taking a collective group of people together, finding out what they're the best at, and then putting those things together. And I think the way I tried to cultivate that and let everybody know, I have bosses now, you have bosses. I just want to know I have a voice. And I'm a big believer that the leader oftentimes shouldn't be the first person to talk, because once you do, everyone kind of slightly defers to, they may not give their opinion after that. They're going to defer to the leader. So yeah, man, we just had, like as an officer, you're supposed to plan for a company mission. And I bring in my 3 lieutenants and my fire support officer, and we take our, all these doctrinal terms that we've learned about envelop and all this and that. But that private who didn't graduate from high school in bumfuck New Mexico could give a rat's ass about envelopment. He wants to know and needs to know why it's important for him to be guarding that alley that it looks like nothing's coming down. So it's the ability to translate that, and to know that private, while he may not realize it, I want to know what he thinks and what he sees, because he should have a voice in that whole process. So the way we did our planning was, instead of bringing the 3 officers, I had all these guys that I was with, on Haifa Street, just a wealth of knowledge. So I'd bring in 15, 16, all my officers, my E6s, my E7s, and like, all right, sort of, here's the mission we got handed. How do you think we should do it? And I would give everybody a few minutes, just like you would with a handful of officers. Let everybody come up around the room, with their own ideas, and let's just all talk about it out loud. And, sort of the deal was, every one of you will have a voice. Everybody has a vote in this process. But at the end of the day, the buck has to stop somewhere. So if there's 15 of you, you each have a vote. Your vote counts for 1. I have 1 vote, but it counts for 16. So always had the ability. Now, how many times I pulled that card. You probably wouldn't need one hand to count that, because usually they had a better idea than I did. But I think it instilled in them is that, a lot of people talk about, I want to hear what you have to say, when really, you're in corporate America now. Like, I want to hire people and empower them to go do their job and do this and that. And what they really mean is, I want to hire people to do what the hell I tell them to do, just so I don't have another headache on my hands. And so I really try to foster a culture where, when I say you have a voice, they believed it and they weren't afraid to express that voice. And I think all that did was just get more and more creative, great ideas out there, and allow me to use probably the one thing I am good at, is take all those things and put it together.
Man, that's cool. So let's talk then the second deployment, because I'm curious how you motivate people when the mission set is so different from the first go round. So if you could talk for a minute, like, hey, we're going in the year that you're going back in, and what that mission looked like. And then let's talk about how you tried to motivate people with that mission.
Yeah, so the mission was much different. Instead of targeted operations, it was 24/7 presence in sector. Sorry, COVID rules, neighbors, lawn guys over there.
Can't hear it at all.
Okay, good. And so it's one, you had this idea, we're going back to Haifa Street again, and we had done a lot of training based off this. We realized the area we're going into, there's not a lot of, urban fighting, if you want to call it that. The area is also, we didn't deal with IEDs a whole lot the first go around. This area is now not only the hot spot for IEDs, it's all the EFPs, that were coming in late 06 through 2007. They didn't start then, but they were really becoming prominent then in Eastern Baghdad. So it's like, what the hell are we doing? So I'm supposed to go out and drive around for 8 hours in the most heavily IED'd area in all of Baghdad to accomplish what? So yeah, it was a significant leadership challenge. As to how did I motivate the men?
Yeah, I
wouldn't say motivate was the right word. I would say go back to kind of some of the things I was talking about before. Of, you can't polish a turd, man. So I didn't try to, and I was just honest of, hey, we got a mission. This is our job to do. I don't like it any more than you do, but we can't not do it. That's not what we signed up for. That's not what we took an oath to do. And just because things, we can't pick and choose, which and how we get to fight. This is the hand we've been dealt, so let's go do it to the best of our abilities. They didn't like it, but I think they respected the transparency in that. If I didn't try to use car salesman of we were accomplishing some greater good, because frankly, I don't think we were, and neither did they.
And I believe you guys got extended right early on in that deployment. Like, you were at the front end of the surge.
Yeah. As soon as we got there, we deployed late October, got in country mid-October, first week there, got told about the surge. We knew we were going to miss Thanksgiving and Christmas. And now with the 12-month deployment being 15, we were going to miss 2 Thanksgivings, 2 Christmases.
And also, we jumped over a very important point. You have a 3-month-old, right? When you deploy that second time.
Yeah.
Right,
so that was
I've talked to 2 guys, Jeff. I'm sorry to cut. I was just going to say, like, first deployment, it's just you, right? I mean, it's not just you, but you have no child, right? You're going into the second one with a 3-month-old. Mine was 6 months old when I went and deployed. Like, how did that change how you thought about things?
It didn't change. I've been asked that before. It didn't change how I operated. It did, and I talked about it before. I was always the guy that, hey, I'm a father, husband, I have feelings just like anybody else, but I was really good at flipping the switch and saying bye to him, walking him out to the car. When I say it broke me, man, just like saying bye, because I think, I had that perspective of what had happened the first deployment. And it's like this wave of a million, like everything that you think of, raising a son, in life, riding his bike, catching his first ball, all these things, like literally in the split second, man, all that shit went through my head. And just, it took me a long time to get myself together, to go back into that gym, to be back with the men, to get ready to go. And, I didn't flip the switch so quick that time.
I remember that too, man. I remember like walking out of the car, my wife's there, got a 6-month-old crying, like you just turn your back and walk away. Like, oh man, it feels so cold.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about some of, like, if you pick a mission, Jeff, from that second go around when you're in that company command slot, But one that comes to mind that was particularly difficult, either from a leadership perspective or just a dangerous op. Could you talk us through it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the obvious one is March 15th, 2007. A lot leading up to it. We were out all night. One of the few times we did go on a targeted op the night before, looking for a target, and extended on in the middle of the night. The next day, we had a joint mission with the Iraqi Army, and I was required to have 2 platoons on it. And I'm not bitter to the Army, man. It's always the best and worst years of my life, but very honest about it. It was nothing really but a photo op just to show American and, kind of how political things were getting at the time. So I was asking for relief from that mission, kept being told no, because we're out till the wee hours in the morning. Ended up being up all night, get the target back to the station, back to the base. And we were at a patrol base at the time. We had to get him back to Fob Rustamaya, the big main fob. And yeah, on the way back, one of my platoons was hit by an EFP, disabled, the lead Bradley. Everyone was okay. 6 guys get out of the Humvees behind it, start recovery operations, and secondary. And we all know they do it. You put the secondary devices out there and you look for them. And this day the enemy won, and we didn't see it. Yeah, the secondary device goes off, hits the 6 men on the ground. It's similar to one of our Claymores, is ball bearing IED, kills 4 of my men instantly. 2 suffer horrific injuries, but they lived temporarily. They ended up passing, and then, and it was just a painful way, man. Like, you lose 4. I mean, in that environment, you're probably going to lose somebody. You don't count on losing 4. You lose 4, and you hold on hope to the other 2. And we go and visit them in the hospital the next day on the 16th of March. March 18th, get a call. Sergeant Ryan Green was one of the men who was injured, that he had been medically evacuated to Germany. He passed from his injuries. So I had to call the company formation, give them the update. You're not rebounding from the other 4 3 days prior, so now you have this gut punch. And Sergeant Green was just the life of the company, man. And just incredible kid. So then we, yeah, that sucks. All right, we still got Doc Leitner, Sergeant Nicholas Leitner. He was our medic, kind of hang on to him. And so then so we have a memorial for the 5 guys on March 20th. We go back, we laugh, cry, tell stories. All right, tomorrow we're going to get back on it. Let's do this for Doc Leitner. Let's go finish this thing off. And the next day, get a call that Doc Leitner had passed from his injuries after making it all the way back to the States. So all 6 men gone from one event. Then you got Kuhn, kind of the hero of the day. The reason Sergeant Green and Sergeant Leitner had lived temporarily was, the lone guy left on the ground. He jumped out of his Humvee and went and put tourniquets on him. And, Bronze Star with Valor, for what he did that day. And yeah, you kind of rally around him, the example of what bravery looks like on the battlefield. So Leitner passes on the 21st. We have a memorial for him a few days later. Fast forward, April 4th, Kuhn's shot, killed by an enemy sniper. And you read about the impact, that had on me with the events what went down that day. And then 2 months after that, it was right after I left command, but it was so, I always say, well, it's 8 guys, but it was right after I left command, but 8th guy, Sergeant Caleb Christopher, his vehicle was hit by an EFP and he was killed instantly. So, and our unit nickname was Legion, and that's where we always referred to him as the Legion 8.
I was going to say, I don't mean to make you relive this, but for folks who have not read that, like how you just kind of mentioned how it hit you. Could you just speak to that for a minute?
Yeah, no, and I don't mind. And it was, it was a head wound. He was alive, and we get the call, the radio. I'm not with them when it happened, so they call back, tell me they need a bird to medevac him out, and say I need to know some more detail. And they're like, it's a head wound, it's hurt real bad. So he pulls in because of what had happened, and just how respected he was. We didn't want everyone seeing it, so just a couple of the senior guys. We went out, met the Humvee, carried him into our A station while we waited for the bird to get there. And as you can imagine, it's not a pretty scene. It's very, very graphic. And So we're carrying him in, and the bandage comes off his head, and I'm up holding him up under his shoulder and his head, and they get in, they do their thing, they get him on the bird, and we know he's not going to make it, and it sounds terrible, but anyone would maybe say it in a dark room when no one's listening. You don't want him to, because that big and strong of a man, if he were to make it, given the state of how we saw he was in, without out of respect for his family, not going into the details, if he were to make it, he would be a vegetable, and just not the kind of life a man like that. So need to go address the men, and obviously need to clean myself up a little bit first. And, just not just me, the other guys that had carried him in, we're all covered in blood and pieces. And so, yeah, man, so I go into my bathroom, and just completely numb, just a surreal feeling. At the same time, it's so vivid in my memory, like it happened this morning. I mean, I can describe it in such detail. Yeah, so as I'm, soap, water, I start feeling this burning sensation on my face, and I lean forward and look in the mirror, and I see this cut. It's not a huge cut or anything, but enough, the blood's coming out of it, seeping down my face and burning. And then I'm like, all right, what the hell caused that? And then felt the same thing in my hands. I looked down at my hands and just kind of had that came to moment. I had soap in my hands, and I'd been washing my face with that. And I looked down, and I had, small fragments of his skull from carrying him in were stuck in my hands. And just the realization that I guess when I reached up to wipe some sweat off my face, I had sliced myself open with part of another man's skull. And yeah, man, that jacked me up pretty good for 5 years. A lot of other things, but that singular event, I think, was the catalyst of that.
It's hard to believe that's the catalyst. It's almost like that might be one, from what you've described, getting through, like living through some of these other events. That sounds like just another one, but obviously carried a lot of weight. Maybe I could ask something that you teed up for me, which was taking, as you described, kind of like intentionally taking a dangerous route or approach, and how these questions live with you still today. And I'm curious where that comes from.
Yeah, it's something I think about in my head all the time. And I bring it up because I try to pride myself, like, with the book, when I talk about it, like, I know there's so many other guys, like me out there. I mean, nothing special or unique, but have been through similar, different, whatever. They're just different experiences. And sometimes, like, the really hard things are the things that you only want to, you can only talk about when you're alone in a room and no one can hear you. And I think it's important to say it out loud. And that's kind of why because I still don't think I know the answer, but it goes back to, like, on Haifa Street, there was Grenade Alley and Purple Heart Lane. Don't go down those things. Yet sometimes I would tell the guys, like, we need to go down it. So there's that one. Now, objectively, I step back and I look at it of, we're all kind of a product of our training and our experiences. And generally my experiences showed me that when we had the initiative and we were initiating the violence of action, it's really when we had less injuries occur. It was more when we were in a reactive position doing stuff is when we would have guys get hurt. And so because everybody else was avoiding some of these areas, I'm like, well, they know we're not going to go down here, so I'm going to go where they don't think we're going to go. But there's also, and I don't think it was. In fact, I know consciously it wasn't. Like, am I trying to set the stage? Is this some sort of, the more stuff we get in, the more opportunity for, glory, and I know I wasn't doing that, but was there, we all say we sign up because we want to see the action. And so I just think to myself of, did I overdo it sometimes? Did I didn't sit there and plan and say, all right, what can I do to put my guys at most risk today? It was generally the exact opposite of that. It was always not be risk averse, but, conscious of what's going on in the environment. But I'd also be lying if I didn't say that I oftentimes chose to take what some would consider the least likely course of action because, maybe not least likely, but maybe the more dangerous course of action because I felt it was setting up the environment where we could dictate the terms. But I knew in doing that, it was putting, I say myself and my men, more importantly, I'm making decisions that are putting other people's lives at greater risk. Now you can turn that and spin it any way you want. And hey, just by being on sector, their life's at risk. But yeah, then it kind of shifted some towards the end. That second deployment, when it got so bad, I did some things that, never told higher about. 8 hours in sector, 24/7 presence. That's all right. You guys, you're going to go park your ass out right outside the gate, and you're not going to move because I'm tired of getting vehicles blown up. We had every Bradley assigned to us destroyed by EFPs. They gave me a tank platoon. 3 of the 5 M1s were destroyed by EFPs. We were a mechanized infantry unit that was combat ineffective, and we had to walk out and dismount patrol around our immediate area because we got blown up so much. Yeah, I don't know if I did a good job explaining that. Just that, sometimes why am I knowingly doing something this dangerous? And I just think it's important to acknowledge that I feel very confident that I was doing it for the right reasons, but I also can't ignore the fact that maybe there was another part. And I don't know, is there something in me that's just wired that way? And I don't know, I haven't come to grips with it yet. And I'm probably rambling like a complete idiot.
No, not at all. It's like some people might have a risk aversion. It's almost opposite in this case, where you're seeking out. It sounds like, Jeff, like somewhat calculated risk.
It wasn't reckless. I'm confident in that.
No, right. That's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, do you exhibit that in other parts, like today, corporate America? It's not the same. People's lives in this case aren't the same, like on the line in the same way, but you could be more risk prone than someone else for sure. Do you exhibit that, or was it strictly limited to that combat environment?
No, it's, and that's why I think I still, my wife gets sick of hearing me say it, but I always say that I've never had a positive thing happen in my life that came from me sitting around waiting for somebody else to make a decision. And so I think that's a lot of it. And I think that's what it comes to. And that's why I kind of chose to do those things in that environment. It was, hey, they know that it's their terrain. They know it. Let's maybe turn that against them. Let's go to the areas they don't expect us to go. And then, so now I do things, not in a combative way. I try to be the initiative. Now, there's something to be said for tactical patience as well. It's not reckless run on all aspects of my life. It's just go, go, go. It's when and how to do that. But I would say maybe it's just kind of inherent in who I am. And it doesn't always work out.
Is that where the power of choice comment came from that you shared earlier? Is it related to this?
Yeah, man, just from, as I went through those 5 years that I talked about, wasn't in a good spot, finally got my head out my ass and kind of got me back to being me. I started doing, being the best son I could be, the best father I can be. And when I met my wife, Ann, the best husband, and now father to our 3 kids and friend and all those things, is I realized that all those things during those 5 tough years, those things didn't go away. What went away was I didn't make the right choice. Is I can't control any of these things that happened in my life. They did. This is the situation I've been dealt. Mine is no better or worse than anybody else. It's different and it's mine. And what I came to realize is what I do have is the choice to how am I going to respond to that? And what decision am I going to make every day? Am I going to focus on the burden of these horrible things that happened to me personally and to my men over these experiences? Or am I going to focus on the privilege of leading our nation's men and women, wearing the uniform into harm's way, and the responsibility and privilege that goes with that, the privilege of having an amazing wife, the privilege of amazing friends, of these amazing young kids who are a colossal pain in my ass, but they're amazing.
Amen.
It sounds like a no-brainer, but I think sometimes, we always say sometimes I think the exception can become a norm, and sometimes you make the wrong choice if you make it enough where, the norm becomes the exception. And I think that's what happened to me over those 5 years, where I kind of went to that black hole. And it took me snapping out of it to realize that, the power of choice and the power of human connection are what make this life so beautiful. It's what makes it so hard at times, but it all starts with a choice.
If I can, and if you explained it there, Jeff, no worries. But was there a catalyst type event or moment in those 5 years that helped you, as you described, like pull your head out? Basically, did something happen where you were like, "All right, I got to turn this around now"?
Yeah, I mean, it was, yeah. I'll probably cry here. Most times I do when I talk about it. I didn't talk about all those things, and it was, so you go back, the mirror incident happened in April of 2007. I got left active duty the following May of 08. And so it was Christmas of 2011. I went back and visit my mom and my brothers and stepdad back in Florida. And my mom, and people have heard me say it before, and you're all going to make fun of me, and I don't blame you. I would too. But my mom had this thing of like, oh, my baby's big blue eyes are just the light of my life, and whenever I'm down or sad, I just think about that, and I know that everything's going to be okay. So that night we had dinner, sat on the couch, grabbed a beer, and she just looks at me and just starts bawling, crying. And I think she's got some bad health news or something to tell me.
Wow.
And she finally gets it together, and she just said, the light's gone.
She could see it in you.
Yeah, she's like, when I look at my baby's big blue eyes, I don't see the light anymore. I see that my boy looks dead inside. And it just breaks my heart that there's nothing I can do to fix it. It's something he's got to figure out on his own. But for the first time in my life and your life, I don't know if everything's going to be okay. So,
oh man.
Yeah. God. So that was, yeah, man, that hit me like a ton of bricks. So that's when I went and started talking about things and opened up about things, and just sort of realized this act that I thought I had a good job. I was making good money, 9 to 5. I put the act on and thought I was fooling everybody.
Yeah.
And just got bitch slapped right across the face by my mom. It was the best thing that ever happened to me, man.
Oh God. I mean, I've also been like highly functional in those events too. It sounds like you're doing fine at work. Everything else is good, but just as your mom said, lights are gone from the eyes. And it's crazy how easily moms read their sons, yeah, it's amazing that they can see it. Oh man. All right. I wanted to ask one other question about combat. Then I got 2 others that I ask everybody, and then we'll wrap up so you can get back to your day. The first one was a quote that I really liked from the book, and I just wanted to hear your explanation, but there's no background music playing in combat.
That came from the least likely of places. The girl that I dated all through college, everyone thought back then we were going to get married. Great gal. Her name's Kristen. And she was never, this was in the SEAL dream. And I'll give her credit. She, from early on, once I started really talking about it, said, I'm not cut out for military life. I don't want to be the wife of someone doing this. And if you and I are ever going to go anywhere, that ain't happening. And I'm like, whatever, she'll get used to it type deal. But yeah, it was her dad. When I was talking to him, he was always trying to talk me out of it. And then, her and I split up, stayed in touch with her dad. And then when I finally made the decision that I was going to go in after, September 11th and all that happened, I was talking to him one time, and he just said, man, Jeff, he's like, don't do this. Don't do it. He's like, this is not shit you see on TV, man. There's no background music in war. And that just always stuck with me. And this is like the ultimate businessman who has no military experience, no nothing. It is just, I don't know. I thought it was pretty profound what he said.
It is. It's so true though, when you hear it.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say it's kind of impressive that you have an ex whose father you're still friends with. I think that says a lot about, no wonder your guys like you. Anybody must like you, man.
I don't know about that.
And sorry, there was one other question, and that was something else that you shared with me beforehand. And this is, I really want to hear about this. You're in a hotel bar talking to a Vietnam vet 6 months after getting out of active duty, and what that conversation was. It sounds great.
No, it's great, but not great. Cause it requires an admission on my part that I always tell people, like, I didn't talk about a lot of things for 5 years. And I never shared anything about like the mirror incident for 5 years. And I lied because the one time I did was with a complete stranger in a hotel bar, and like, we didn't start all liquored up. But like he had an Army hat on, and just reached over and said, "Hey, thanks for your service as Army as well." And, a little bit older gentleman, and what'd you do? You talked, and drinks get going, and then man, he just started talking and started sharing stuff about what happened to him in Vietnam, some really horrible stuff. And then I started sharing things that I hadn't talked with anybody about. Like the first person I talked to was a complete stranger while we were drunk in a bar, and it's sad that it took that. But I brought that up to you because it was back to the exception in the norm, and how the norm, the exception ends up becoming the norm over time. Like I realized, I always tell people, like, it took me a few years to figure things out, that I wasn't kind of who I was. I knew it a lot earlier, because the impact of saying those things out loud, like, took me back to that in such a tough spot. And I bring it up because I think oftentimes we see these things, but the signs were there before, and we just choose to ignore them.
You totally miss them. Yeah. You don't.
I chose to ignore that. I knew then, and I say I lost 5 years of my life. I had I talked about an epiphany earlier, with Elsa. I had one that night, like, dude, I got some shit I got to get figured out to be back to being me. But I chose to not address it, and making that choice, and suppressing that and fighting that, took away a few other years of my life that I can't get back.
There is something about that. It's so easy to look back at how you acted and like, hey, that should have been a clear indicator something was wrong, Yeah. But at the time, you just let it go and don't address it.
Yeah, and I think that's the reason. And that's why I brought it up. Is like, I chose to let it go. Like, I remember this. It was a very impactful thing of like, I need to get some stuff figured out. So it wasn't that I missed it. It was that it hit me, smack in the forehead, and I chose to not deal with it.
Damn. All right, so we're going to transition slightly here. Two questions.
All right.
Two questions, and you're out, Jeff. The first one is there something that you carried with you into combat that carried sentimental value, talisman, good luck, something somebody gave you that you always wanted with you when you were out on patrol or kept in your room?
Yeah, it went with me both deployments, and I don't want to say it's been overused now because it's still the freaking baddest quote of all time, but the man in the arena quote.
Oh, I love it, man. I love it.
And I remember reading that way back when, I'm going to be that guy. And so I printed it out on a sheet of paper, and it was on my room. First deployment, it was in my room. Second deployment, yeah, that was the one constant throughout everything.
That's cool. Funny fact that nobody cares about. That's what I wanted the name of this podcast to be, was The Man in the Arena.
Oh, really?
But it was taken and didn't have anything about combat in it. Anyway, I love that quote, man. It's a great one.
Yeah, it's awesome.
It's so good. Damn. All right, that's good. And then the last question, kind of interested how you'll answer this one, but I try to ask everybody, especially with what you went through growing up, Jeff, the wanting to be a SEAL, not making that work out, but this incredible career that you have in the Army, then the 5 years of loss effectively in your life that you have and what you deal with now. Would you go back and do all that again?
Just like every one of your guests had said, hell yes, 100%. So I always talk about, it's the best years of my life. Hey, Ann. It's the best years of my life. It's the worst years of my life, but anything good that I have in my life now is a byproduct of those experiences. And I wouldn't be any bit of who I am without that upbringing as a child, with the failures, with the success, with the loss. It's what set me up to have this amazing life that I have today, and I'm grateful for every bit of it, and very, very fortunate.
That's awesome. And then that was really the last question, but I am curious, how hard was it to write a book, Jeff? Was that painful? Like, you don't want to do that again?
No, I had a lot of help. I had a co-writer. Her name's Lauren. It's LC on the book. Lauren Mickler, but it's name's Lauren Mickler, incredibly talented. And, I started trying to do it by myself. And I mean, I think I'm a pretty decent writer, but I was struggling. Like, it was almost just like I was telling my version of it instead of trying to capture the reader's attention with it, if that makes sense. It didn't really to me, but people that are in that space are like, oh, that makes perfect sense. You need someone to connect. And yeah, complete total opposites. She has no military background whatsoever, but trust me, that's a name. Certain things I can't talk about, but that is a name you will see again and again in some much larger projects than mine. Just very, very talented. So it was an interesting exercise. I'm really glad I did it. Would I like to do it again? I have some ideas. I've been approached about some other ideas, but right now I feel it's more important to kind of put that focus on the young family. We went through that process when we just had my 5-year-old. It was just him at the time. The other one was born after the book was finished, so it was just finding a publisher and all that. And my third boy was born. But yeah, so we'll see, man. There's other things I want to say in the works. There's other ideas out there,
awesome.
But it was a good exercise. The thing that I struggled with doing it, and the reason it took so long to do it, is if I did it, I really wanted it to be as raw as possible. And in doing that, you have to bring up some really bad memories of the worst day of people's lives. And again, back to taking the dangerous path. Why am I knowingly choosing something that I know is going to hurt someone? Not hurt as in intentional, but make them hurt by reliving those experiences. But to do it and not be real and authentic, then I'm not doing the story justice of how it deserves to be told. So it was always just awkward. I don't know. I just couldn't compromise situation. So it was the families ultimately telling me to do it and wanting me to do it and saying, this is a story that needs to be told and I'm very open about it. Yeah, it's my story. It's through kind of my experiences, but it is a story of two groups of incredible men and our collective experience together over 2 deployments. And, the promise that we made to the families of those men that, they're never going to be forgotten.
This has been great, Jeff. I appreciate the time. I'm glad you wrote that book. And I think a lot of people can connect and relate to what you describe, whether it's in combat or how you deal with it. So thank you very much for doing that and for the time.
No, thank you, Ryan. And again, man, keep up the great work. Love the podcast and looking forward to seeing who else you get on here next. So thanks again.
Stay tuned following this episode for a combat story from one of our listeners. We're about to hear the combat story from Yonel Yogi Dorelis, a retired CSAR medevac pilot, and contrary to what he might say, a distinguished one at that, who earned a Distinguished Flying Cross with B device over 6 combat tours. I hope you enjoy his combat story as much as I did.
Again, my name is Yonel Yogi Dorelis. I am a retired Air Force Major / helicopter pilot. Flew the HH-60G Payfalk, primarily in the combat search and rescue mission. Born and raised in New York City. Always wanted to be in the military as far back as I can remember. Always wanted to fly as far back as I can remember. Ended up serving in the Marine Corps. They had too many pilots. Gave us an opportunity to inter-service transfer to the Navy. Flew CH-53Es in the Navy for 7 years. Stationed in the Philippines and Norfolk, Virginia. Got out, was working in New York City in the theater business of all things. And missed flying and had an opportunity to join the Army National Guard as a warrant officer. Took that opportunity out on Long Island and was flying Hueys in the Army National Guard. Did that for about 5 years. Then an opportunity to join the Air National Guard out on Long Island came about, flying the 60 and doing the combat search and rescue mission. And applied and was accepted into that unit and was in that unit about 1.5 years before an opportunity to come back on active duty presented itself, which I took advantage of and stayed 13 years till I retired. Highly interesting and undistinguished military career, but I loved every minute of it, and it was really probably the greatest experience of my life, other than having kids and having a family. As far back as I can remember, I was interested in the military and interested in flying. I can't remember a catalyst or anything. It was just something I was always interested in. Don't come from a military family at all. My uncle served in World War II, but no significant military service to speak of. Matter of fact, I grew up with a single working mom. She was a typical Jewish mother. She probably wanted a doctor or a lawyer, but I put that notion to rest early. She knew from early on I was interested in the military. Specifically wanted to be a Marine. Also, as far back as I can remember, I saw the Sands of Iwo Jima as a kid with John Wayne, and I was hooked. It's all I thought about. I was just fascinated with the Marine Corps. Read everything I could about them, learned everything I could about the Marine Corps, and just that was my goal. And once I found out there were Marine aviators, that was it. I was laser focused on being a Marine aviator. Accepted in the Marine Officer program after a couple of false starts. I wasn't a great kid growing up, so I had to kind of clean myself up and improve myself before they would accept me. Was finally accepted in the officer program while in college. Commissioned a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps in May of '84. Went to the basic school. Just about done with the basic school when they called us into the auditorium, O'Bannon Hall, there at TBS, and said, hey, kind of sucks to be you guys. Nobody's going to flight school for at least 2 years. Marine Corps has too many pilots at both ends of the pipeline, and they gave us a few options, one of which turned out to be an inter-service transfer to the Navy, which about 150 of us took. And a few months later, I was ensign in the Navy down in flight school in Pensacola. Graduated flight school in August of '86, flew CH-53Es in the Navy, was stationed in the Philippines and then in Norfolk, Virginia. Got out of the Navy in '91, went back to New York. As I said, worked in the theater business, in ticket sales, and really missed flying and missed the military. Really felt I'd made a mistake, but there was no going back. So opportunity came to join the Army National Guard, which I did. Flew in the Army Guard for about 5 years, flying Hueys as a warrant officer. And then opportunity to join the Air Guard came about, flying H-60Gs in the Air Force Combat Search and Rescue Mission. About a year and a half after that, opportunity came to go on active duty, which I took advantage of and ended up staying another 13 years till I retired in January of 2011. So it's pretty much all I wanted to do. I've had, like I said, a very interesting and highly undistinguished military career, but I've truly loved every minute of it. It was my first time in combat, March 3rd, 2002, during Operation Anaconda. We had been working out of Kandahar. We got scrambled to go up to FARP Texaco. First couple of days out of Anaconda, things went to shit pretty fast. And we went up there to FARP Texaco. So we were up there all day, experienced an earthquake, just waiting for something to happen. Aircraft were flying in and out all day. There was a lot of stuff going on, and a lot of shot-up aircraft were coming in, kind of scary actually for me. I remember looking at all the shot-up aircraft going, man, if rounds could do that to an aircraft, imagine what it's going to do to me. So it was pretty sobering, and we were there all day waiting for something to happen, and again, not a lot of folks knew who Air Force Combat Rescue was. We were sort of there, but we weren't really attached to anyone and part of any op plans or anything, so people kind of looking at us askance, but no one really knew what to do with us. And we were spinning up, getting ready to go back to Kandahar. It was starting to get dark, and we got a call on the radio saying, hey, there's some guys, wounded guys, in this one location. No one's been able to get them out all day. Any aircraft going in there has been shot off the LZ, yada, yada, yada. Would you guys be willing to give it a try? So our flight lead said, yeah. We shut down the aircraft. We briefed up the mission. Kind of one of those cliche movie moments. Flight lead Tom Cahill goes, hey, you guys know if we do this, there's a good chance we're going to get effed up. Does anybody have a problem with that? And again, in typical movie fashion, nobody said anything. And I remember one of my PJ buddies, Bob Roberts, he goes, hell no. And, I remember thinking, well, I kind of do have a problem with that, but I can't say anything because nobody else is saying anything. So we went ahead and launched out on the mission, and it was a little crazy. Just a lot of weird, bad information, 5 radios going on at one time. We landed in the wrong LZ twice. Finally, were able to locate the wounded guys, picked them up. PJs had whole blood and were able to save their lives. And we got back to the FARP. I think we had between 7 and 8 minutes of gas left. We stayed on station way past Bingo to make sure we could find these guys. And I'd have to say, in answer to your third question, what's the most dangerous mission I was on? I'd probably say that mission was the most dangerous, just because there was so many weird things going on. The JTAC was not located with the wounded guys. He was in a TOC somewhere. We were in constant contact with the Air Operations Center, the Combined Air Operations Center in Saudi Arabia, and they were often passing us information that we had just passed back to them, so there was a lot of confusion that way. And we were on a pretty long leash, so just to get approval to launch and kind of proceed with the mission without having to fill all these guys in the rear end was pretty frustrating. We landed in the wrong LZ, in different LZs twice that weren't the correct LZ, and got attacked both times, once with mortars and once with small arms and RPGs. And then at one of those LZs, some 3 soldiers from the 10th Mount jumped on the aircraft, assuming we were there to exfil them. We weren't. I remember the PJ telling me, hey, sir, none of these guys are wounded. And I had to tell him, hey, those guys got to get off the aircraft. And we kind of had to throw them off the aircraft back into the fight, which I felt pretty bad about. They weren't happy. It was kind of like that scene in Apocalypse Now where the Huey lands and that one kid is like, I'm not going. And his NCO grabs him and pulls him out. It's kind of funny. It's comical now. I'm sure those guys didn't think it was funny, but we had to throw him off the aircraft. And then we took off again and finally found the right LZ. I remember the way we spotted it was a guy just had a buzzsaw with this chem light, and we got in there and were able to get the wounded out. Again, like I mentioned, the PJs had whole blood, so they were able to administer that life-saving first aid, and we got back to the FARP, like I said, with 7-8 minutes of gas, and we were able to get these guys to the hospital after. First we dropped them off at Bagram, and then we went back, and we were able to get everybody back alive, and it was successful. So, but I think I've had some pretty exciting and hairy missions since then, but I'd probably say that was the most dangerous, just because there was so much lack of information was probably what made it so dangerous. It's just we were kind of operating by the seat of our pants, and thankfully between the skill of the flight lead and the PJs and everybody involved, we were able to pull it off. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. It's the greatest privilege of my life to serve this country, to be able to fly aircraft for this country, and to be able to serve, most importantly, with the amazing men and women I had the opportunity to serve with. I've witnessed countless acts of incredible bravery, and just as cliche as it sounds, truly been an honor and a privilege to serve this country and to serve in the military. I consider my service in the military a gift, every minute of it. All right, Ryan, I hope this helps. Let me know if you need anything else. You want me to revise anything. Hopefully you can edit it the way you need to edit it, and I'll send some pictures along with this. And again, thanks for the opportunity to tell my story, and hope to meet you in person. Take care, man.
I hope you enjoyed this combat story. People often write to me with incredible stories and suggestions for interviews. If you want to share a combat story of your own or from someone you served with, record yourself for up to 5 minutes and email it to ryan@combatstory.com. I'll select some of these stories and feature them at the end of our episodes. Thanks for listening. Stay safe.